Really warm welcome to this evening's event. And we should say to this Gulkine Cymru Festival 2024 event. And we're able to be here together for this event thanks to the very generous financial support of the Welsh Government. Um, but not only that, there's a most amazing array of authors. If you've watched the first event, you've already tasted the wonderment. And over the next 2 weeks, there's all sorts of events. Do please, if you're able to join, come along and just hear some amazing authors in English or in Welsh talking about crime fiction. I feel uberly honoured to be here talking to the amazing Elly Griffiths, as they've said, and it's so true, one of the greats of contemporary crime fiction. If my maths are right, Elly, 15 years, I think, writing crime fiction. Yeah. Thank you so much for all your work. Thank you so much for the way that you've brought so much joy into our lives with your series and your characters. And you have this most amazing ability, to have so many different stories ongoing or characters developing. It's a kaleidoscope of criminal wonderment. Thank you. How are you?
I'm really happy to be here, and thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful. It's lovely to see you again, Jackie. Thank you for a kaleidoscope of criminal wonderment. I'm definitely just writing that down to go on my next book. But yeah, so I think it must be 15 years, and the last word is my 30th book,
Oh,
which
congratulations.
I had to, maths isn't my strong point, so I had to work it all out and add it all up. But I think that's true. Counting my children's books, it's my 30th book. So yeah, feel very lucky, really, and very happy to be here.
Fabulous, fabulous. And we should say to everybody joining us on stream at the moment, and then everybody who's going to be able to watch this after because it's being recorded, thank you for joining us wherever in the world you are. We are joined together by this love of crime fiction, and undoubtedly you've joined because I suspect you are well aware of the wonderment of Ellie's writing. I'm going to ask a little bit about Ellie's writing in general, but then we are going to get down to the nitty gritty of your most recent publication, The Last Word, if that's okay with you. We should say, of course, in case anybody's not aware, that Ellie's won the CWA Dagger in the Library, been shortlisted, I think, at least 5 times for the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year Award, long listed for the CWA Gold Dagger for the Lantern Men. Um, I think it's just that thing of your work is constantly recognized for that quality that is there. But if you don't mind me asking, if we go back to the beginning, am I right? I think I read that it really all began on maternity leave.
Well, it did really. I mean, I've always written, and I
Mhm.
know we've chatted about this before, Jackie. I wrote my first crime novel when I was 11. It's called The Hair of the Dog, which must have been something my parents talked about a lot. Um, I'm not sure that I really knew that meaning of it, which, is if you have too much to drink, you should have another drink as soon as possible the next day. But I think I kind of did know that the sort of idea that if somebody had done something wrong to you, they would be the person to make it up. So it's a kind of revenge thriller,
Mm.
very Agatha Christie-esque, set in Rottingdean, which is near I live now. Then when I was at school, I used to write little stories about Starsky and Hutch. Um, following on from that, I wrote a thriller about Italian motor racing drivers, something about the publishing world called Between the Covers, which wasn't really very scandalous because I didn't know a lot of scandal. But yes, it was on maternity leave that I wrote what became my first published book.
And I've heard a number of authors talk about those life changing moments, not necessarily being on maternity leave, but that have enabled. There's been some creative, that aura that's been there. That's or maybe just an ability to take your mind off what is happening. I don't know, but 15 years on, or a few more years on, to think. So the Ruth Galloway series, the Brighton Mysteries, the Harbinger Car series, and I have to say also, and we'll talk about that just slightly, A Girl Called Justice, that series. How has it been over this time period, working between those series, making those decisions to say, it's a book in this series now that I should write? I mean, are you very pragmatic, or do you listen to the spirits move? How have you made your decisions as you've gone on?
I think it's a bit of both, really. Yeah, but I mean, thinking of that maternity leave moment, that's a really interesting idea that there was something sort of life-changing going on. And I tell you, it was life-changing because I was expecting twins,
Oh,
and they're 25 now. So that was 25 years ago. And of course, the book that I wrote then wasn't crime; it was a sort of historical. It was a memoir, really, of my dad, fictionalized memoir of my dad's life. Came to Italy from England after the First World War, and called The Italian Quarter. So yeah, so I think that was kind of a moment when I sort of felt lots of things changing in my life. But with the different series, yeah, I think certainly I have ideas, and I'm not sure where they're going to go. And I do think, oh, maybe there's enough archaeology in that to be Ruth, or, can I make somebody disappear so it can be a Brighton mystery? Or would it be something that Harbinder could solve? So I think the ideas just come, and then I do kind of pragmatically sort them out into the series. There are things that and sometimes I think, oh, I've got an idea for 3 books, and actually turns out I've got an idea just for one. And I think that was the case with The Last Word, actually, that there were several ideas that came together in that one book, really.
yeah, and again, being able, though, I just think it's so important to be able to say that the ability to write different series, very different characters, and have those styles. You have a writing style, there's no doubt about it. And I'd like to say the style that you have is you bring the reader in. The reader feels at home, despite whatever might be going on, some very unpleasant things in certain circumstances, but you invite us in to be a part of something. So I think that's very much you. And yet these series are all very different.
Oh, that's such a lovely description to invite somebody in, or rather, a little bit like a vampire has to be invited in. But our mutual friend Leslie Thompson, I know, a good friend of both of ours, really
Wonderful
good
writer.
writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's so fab. Anyhow, she's got a good theory, a good definition of cozy crime, and she says that because sometimes we're asked. A lot of authors who write on that kind of cozy end of the spectrum ask, do you mind being called cozy crime? And I absolutely don't, as long as people buy the books. But Leslie says she wonders if it's how you feel when you read the book. So it doesn't really matter. It's not really talking about what's in the book, but how you feel, and whether you feel, as you said, invited in, and whether you think, like, for example, if I'm reading an Anne Cleeves book, Anne doesn't shy away from horrible things in the world, but I feel sort of safe because I think, oh, great, here comes Vera, here comes Matthew Ben, I know where I am, and also I suppose I trust Anne. So I think maybe that's quite a good definition of what makes things cozy.
I think it is, and I'm also thinking, though, authors that that they're going to bring that justice.
Oh yes,
And and sad things might have happened, but it's like you said about feeling safe with Anne.
yes.
And I think and it's all right. This author's going to take me, like yourself, on a journey, and there might be some testing times, and I might get a little bit scared, and I might not be able to work, but I know by the end they'll have, they'll bring me in, they'll bring me safely to shore.
Yeah,
And that'll be,
yes, I think that's it, isn't it? And I don't think it's any coincidence, really, that the 2 Agatha Christie books that's still so popular, always been so popular, and then there were None and Murder on the Orient Express, because they're books in which justice is served, isn't it? But in a quite a unorthodox way. So maybe when we're not wanting to get heavy here, when we're losing faith in some of the big organizations in the world,
indeed,
sometimes unorthodox justice is what we're looking for. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about crime fiction in general, really.
now before I dissect The Last Word, and so much I want to ask about it. I remember when you and I first had a conversation like this. It was actually for the radio, but you and I could see each other. And I remember you talking about writing, and that you went to the bottom of the garden to
Yes.
write. Are you still doing that? Are you
Yes.
still writing at the bottom of the garden?
Yes, that's where I'm speaking from you now. So you can see the
Yay!
tree out there. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
shed in the garden. I remember that so well, Jacky. It was such a lovely experience, wasn't it? It was the middle of lockdown and we weren't seeing anyone. And there you were in my shed. And there we were, and it was your radio show, so I could choose music. And it was such a lovely experience. So yes, that's where I am. And it's quite for me, it feels very, and in lockdown particularly, quite important just to be able to leave the house and go somewhere else.
Yeah, like go to work.
Go
Have
to work.
that
Yeah, just
different
that little
space.
journey. It
Yeah.
stops you. It's amazing how just those few yards, it's not greatly, not a very big garden, just stops people interrupting you. They have to have a real reason to come up to the shed. So
Yeah. Yeah. So and thank you for taking us then into that space for the conversation. You know, that thought of, so this is where those books come into being, and we're there with you now. I think that's lovely. Let's get into the last word then, so I can get as many questions before we invite the audience to put their questions there. Published then by Quercus, came out the start of this year, number 4 in the Harbinger Car series. That you said it had those different elements that you brought together in this book, and I wondered, it's part of that series, but Harbinger isn't necessarily front and center in this book. Could you talk to us about the decision that you made? You know, it's in that series, but it's not necessarily her story in a way, or her solving the crime.
yeah, I've been accused of trying to have everything my own way in this book because I think
Good, do it.
yeah, why not? The
Yeah.
publishers have said it's a standalone, which it is, because it's not like the Ruth books in that there's very much a series, and you know things changed in the course of the series, and you should really start at the beginning to go through it, but they can be read in any order. So there's sort of a standalone, but it's sort of Harbinger 4.
Mhm.
Or it's the sequel to the Postscript Murders. So it has the characters that are in the Postscript Murders. So you've got Edwin, who is the retired BBC producer. You've got Edwin and Benedict, the ex-monk, and you've got Natalka, the Ukrainian carer. So they first appeared in Postscript Murders. And of course, in that book, you have Harbinger as well. And I think Harbinger's journey has been, she was the detective in Stranger Diaries, and she really did just turn up. I thought, wow, who's this? And she's the detective in the Postscript Murders. Bleeding Heart Yard is kind of her on her own in London. That's kind of her book. And you definitely see, you know, her life changing in lots of ways. So in this, in a way, she is a little bit more detached because she's still in London, but the crimes are taking place on the South Coast. But she's very much, she's the person they turn to for advice. And of course, it's not long before she's making her way back to Shoreham to see how they're getting on, also to see her mum. So she is still there, and you do see a bit of her. But yes, it's probably Edwin and Natalka and their detective agency, because they're amateur detectives front and center.
And yet there's a beautiful moment where is it Brannan? The
Oh yes.
yeah. So Brannan, she's actually the police officer that's called in when one of the bodies is discovered. And somebody mentions, I think it's her sidekick, how Harbinger for her is you know, she's like her idol, this legend, and it's beautiful, you know, that reference into that character, because I think she is a special, you know, force for the law. And
Oh, thank you. And I did think it would be quite nice for Harbinder to know that, particularly as Liv Brennan is another woman of colour, that Harbinder is she's quite surprised to find she's somebody's heroine, but she is kind of a legend in the force. So I thought that was quite nice. And but you know what? It's quite difficult to write about a detective who's good at it. Because I want to show all the way through that Harbinger's really good at her job. And yes, she gets promoted and she becomes DI and goes to the Met. But when you have a detective who's meant to be very good, of course, you could solve it in chapter 2, couldn't you? So you have to keep not letting them solve it. So it adds another layer when you want to show somebody doing an investigation in an exemplary way, but still they don't get the murderer till the last chapter.
But things, yeah, I think those impediments. Now, so we've spoken about Harbinder and other officers in this novel, that appear. But I wondered this thing with the detective agency. So this amateur sleuthing and the partnership is sublime. It really is. That measuring again. How do you get that balance, between two, should we say, different strands of crime fiction writing, but this beautiful weaving together? Did it come easily, or was there a wrangling involved in the blending?
Do you know, this book did involve quite a lot of wrangling, and I hope it doesn't all show. But yes, it was. I mean, I suppose in some ways it's an age-old problem, because Poirot had Inspector Japp, didn't he? And Sherlock Holmes had the people at Scotland Yard. I've forgotten the detective's name for the moment. So you've always got that, the amateur versus the professional, and yeah, you do have to sort of wrangle it. So Edwin, who calls himself the oldest sleuth in the country, and Natalka have set up this detective agency, and Natalka goes off, on a tangent all the time. But Edwin he's I think I said that he's kind of deploying his age as a sort of cloak of invisibility, so he can sort of get away with things that maybe you couldn't otherwise. And I have to say, one of my favorite scenes, and maybe I'm not allowed to have favorite scenes, but if I had, it's when Edwin asks for help in using his phone camera, and there's sort of slightly patronizing younger people helping him, but of course he's already recorded them all. He knows perfectly well how to use a phone camera. So I did quite enjoy that difference. And of course, when you have some amateurs, they can, I was saying early on, the trouble with having a detective is meant to be very good and doesn't break any rules. Of course, they can break lots of rules, so that's quite fun.
Yeah, and it is. I think, again, the humor. I listened to the audiobook of this, which is beautiful.
Oh, great.
But I found myself, I'm thinking of the people, they're driving past, or listening in the car, and I'm laughing out loud in certain parts, certain one-liners that are just so dry and so funny. So thank you for the humor as well. Now, you mentioned Edwin's age, and I have to say, I think you have to be one of the most successful authors in the way that you bring together, and it's so natural, and it just feels so right, the diversity of your characters. It's an absolute joy, because none of it feels forced. It just, the kind of people that are in roles that you would see, or the storylines behind them. And as somebody who is getting, a little bit on in life now, the grey
I'm
hair.
sure you're younger than me, Jackie.
Not by much. I mean, I have to say I Wikipedia'd you, so
Okay.
I can honestly say not by much.
Okay.
I'm up there behind you. But to have that character, 84, who is so active. And I know we can't all get to that age and be active. I understand that, but that you've given us a character like that, like Edwin. I think it's so important that that we're not written off at a certain age.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've got to say, it's getting to feel more important to me as well as I get older. And actually, sometimes I look back at my sort of early books, I think, wow, everyone's young. But actually, it is really important to me. And thank you so much, Jackie. That means so much to me that you mentioned sort of diversity in the books, because that is really important to me, because we do live in a wonderfully diverse world. And I want that to be reflected in my books. I don't want them to be full of people like me, because do you know what? They'd be really dull, because I speak to you from my garden shed of the place just outside Brighton that I've lived in since I was 5. So pretty dull. Here she is, white middle-class woman living in her garden shed. We don't necessarily, a few of them in books, fine, but not whole books like that. So I do, and also I love being different characters. I really love being Edwin. I've never been an 84-year-old gay BBC producer, but I just love being him.
So I was going to ask you, this is one of my questions, okay? Gender aside, if we were ever, allowed to meet Elly in life, Would you be more Edwin or more Benedict?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really love being Edwin. I just love his worldview and I love his sort of unflappability and his sort of urbaneness, the way he sort of goes through life in that way, you know. And oh, really, dear boy, I was, you know, I was just listening to Maria Callas, you know, and that sort of thing. I'd love to be that person, but I suppose maybe I would be more Benedict. I would certainly. Benedict's an ex-monk, and I was brought up Catholic. Well, so is Edwin Catholic, actually. But I was sort of, I think I would really empathize with Benedict's doubts and worries. I think I'm a more doubtful person than Edwin. So I think it probably would be Benedict. He's always worried, like if he's slightly too passive aggressive to people at his coffee shop, whether that's actually a sin, is it a mortal sin, is it a serious sin? And I think I'd really enjoy saying something cutting and then I'd really worry about it. So I think probably I'm not cool enough to be Edwin, so probably I'm Benedict.
I would like to be Edwin. Sadly, I feel I'm more Benedict. And the moment that it struck me, and because I'd like to talk about the writing retreat that they go on in the hunt of, you know, might we get some clues as to why certain people are being dispatched. And Benedict feels that he's just not up to snuff. He doesn't feel when, you know, when he's asked what did he hear, and he can only come out with birds as opposed to different kinds of birds, and he feels he's, you know, like the tutor's not actually thinking he's worthy of anything, and he feels envious of Edwin, and I totally get that.
Well, I'm so glad because I mean I get that too because I think we've all had that experience really and sort of digging into that of just, you know, when you want to impress and you want to do well and you just know you're not doing it. And sometimes you're with somebody. I mean, this is going back a long way, but I remember when Andy and I, my husband, were going to, we got married in a Catholic church, and in order to do so, we had to have some Catholic, although Andy's an atheist, sort of instruction.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, I'll ace this because, you know, I was brought up Catholic. And he just got all the questions right, and the priest is saying, "Oh, Andy, without knowing it, you're such a wonderful Christian person." And he was like, "Oh, thank you, Father." I mean, I've got to say the questions were very easy. They were things like, "You've had a row. Do you A, kill each other, B, be unfaithful, C, talk it over?" And Andy's like, "Talk it over, Father." But, you know, I just remember that experience thinking I should be the favorite here, but the priest is all over how wonderful Andy is. So, you know, I empathize with the fact
think it came out. I think that came out in those scenes.
I think it did. I think I was digging into that. So, you know, Benedict goes on this retreat because he is a writer. He's written books. He thinks he's secretly going to do quite well, and he can never quite come up with the right answer. And I think we've all had that. And when the tutor says something like, "Well, you've got an hour, go and write something." And I teach creative writing, as you know, and of course I know you're a university lecturer, but I'm sure you're better at this than me. But I say things like, you know, come back in an hour with a story, and it's simple. It's really hard. And poor Benedict just sits there, and all he can think about is what he had for lunch. So I do empathise with that.
Let's stick on the retreat for a little bit. So Battle House, and our characters have gone along because, again, as I say, that you know, certain people who are writers, aspiring writers, published writers, sadly seem to have died, or have they been suspicious circumstances, or have they been done away with? Well, if you haven't read the book yet, people do so to find out who's done it and why they were doing it. But I wanted to ask you, people have to take it in turns, of course, to prepare either lunch or evening meal. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Elly, and say if you were on that writing retreat at Battle House, you can either choose lunch or the evening meal, depending on where your culinary strengths lie. What meal would you prepare for your fellow, fellow writers on that retreat?
Well, I mean, they cook pasta, and I have to say, I would probably fall back on pasta. As you know, I'm half Italian and half Welsh.
Half Welsh.
I should be able to sing. Well, actually, strictly speaking, a quarter Welsh and a quarter English, and half Italian, because my grandmother, the original Elly Griffiths, was Welsh. So, but my dad was Italian, and I love cooking. I love cooking. I love cooking Italian food. But I'm very much a kind of everything together in one pot sort of cook.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would probably do a lasagna. I think it has to be vegetarian, doesn't it, on the thing? So I'd probably do, my daughter's vegetarian. So I have to say I do make a very nice vegetarian lasagna. So I think I'd go for that, really. And absolutely quantity probably as well. I always cook for way too many people, but that might be what I'd go for.
Great. Lovely. So we've got the meal. That's great. Now, coming out of fantasy but to real life, and writing retreats, or you say, you know, being involved in creative writing, I wonder if you have a writing prompt that you like to use, because is it if only I hadn't, yeah, is the writing prompt, one of the prompts that they're given. Do you have a writing prompt, a memorable one, or one that you like to use?
I remember when you.
Ooh,
Because I think it's just for sort of a short piece of writing, it's very evocative, and I think using the second person there as well makes you sort of address it to somebody. And I always do the thing myself if I ask my students to do it, and I was literally made myself cry. I remember my dad driving me to school, so it is quite evocative. I think somebody says about, because the prompt, as you say, that they use is if only I hadn't. That's quite a negative one to start with. It's not a bad one. You can, but it's quite good for a crime novel, because of course there are a few clues there in people's stories about what they wish they hadn't done. But yeah, I'd maybe go for something a little bit more open. But I remember when you is.
I remember when you.
I think.
I'm just thinking, people watching, you might be thinking about becoming a writer. You might already be a writer. I would say when this conversation is finished, why don't you give that a go?
Oh, I'd love to think that somebody did. And something that I might have used this in the book, but somebody once said to me, which I think is a quote from Picasso, is the muse catches you working. So just start and then see what happens.
Yeah. Just do it.
To think that you go and do that.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah. Now, another aspect of the book, I think it's Edwin. That contemplates classic crime fiction or contemporary crime fiction. It's either Edwin or Benedict, so I can't remember who. Because it's lovely. There's a talk about you know, women in red coats in moody landscapes. Yeah.
I think it's Benedict in Waterstone's Bradford, which is such a beautiful shop.
That's it. Because you mentioned how beautiful it is.
So beautiful.
Yeah. Because he can't. That's it. Because he can't stay away from crime fiction, because his days in holy orders are numbered, and he can't stay away from the crime fiction. But again, so for yourself, Elly, and I'm not asking you to choose anybody's work, because that is so hard. And unfair to you, but I just wonder that balance between classic crime fiction and contemporary novels, when you do have time to read, do you draw from both? Are there times when you prefer one genre to another?
I think when I'm deeply into a book, I do prefer classic crime fiction, partly just because I really love Jacky Collins is my favorite writer, and there's something about the sort of 19th century sort of cadences that I really love. But I think also because I'm just slightly scared, because I get sent lots, as you do. I know lots of, and I'm so lucky to get this. I get sent lots of books to read and review, and that they're all contemporary. And I would just be worried that I would accidentally take an idea or even just a turn of phrase from somebody. So when I'm deep in writing, I probably am sort of reading or rereading some sort of classic fiction or something that's not crime, particularly when I'm writing the book set in the 50s and 60s. I love sort of reading people like Monica Dickens, who wrote about that time. I love Monica Dickens, by the way. So so that sort of thing. But I think really that there's a lot to be said that we're living in a golden age of crime fiction now, really, because there's so many terrific crime writers out there, lots of them on this very program
Indeed,
here. But
without a doubt, yeah.
no, absolutely, without a doubt, and just some amazing writers doing really different things. Like Sarah Hillary, I love the stuff that she's doing. Stu Turton, people, Will Dean. You never know where he's going to go, book to book. Each one amazing, each one so different. Leslie Thompson, we've talked about before. William Shaw, so many great writers.
It is, and in a sense, as a reader, it's almost like, can you all just stop? Because it's so hard to keep up with you, but it is beautiful. And I think for me, it's that sense of being able to say to readers, there is an author for everyone. Yes. There are authors for everyone. There are styles and genre. And the important thing, I think, is, to find the authors that work for you, but also have an open mind to, again, maybe try somebody different or try a new author. Because you never know, you might be surprised by what you find. Speaking of new authors, maybe not new authors, but reworkings. So in The Last Word, there's mention of the Dolly Parton classic, Jolene. Yeah, glorious. And yet, here we are, April 2024, and there's a new version around. Yes, Beyonce's version. I don't know if you've heard it.
Cowboy Carter, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, how do you feel about the reworking and Jolene, the singer to Jolene with an attitude?
Yeah, she's coming after Jolene, hasn't she? I think even Dolly said that. I quite like that. I quite like that she did that she changed that. I mean, I think Beyonce is amazing, and I love country music, so it's
but it made me think of Natalka, because I could imagine her being like that.
Oh yes, I think she could, and it's funny that, I mean, they sort of call these cases Jolene cases, don't they? Yeah, I mean, Natalka wouldn't take anything like that lying down.
No.
Absolutely, she'd be after that Jolene. But Natalka's quite, it's an interesting character to me, because obviously she's Ukrainian. But I invented her, if you like, in 2018, before for the current, tragic circumstances that Ukraine are in. Obviously there'd been a war before, and
which you beautifully remind us of, and I think that's great. It's so important,
because in fact, since then, my sister has hosted a lovely Ukrainian woman who has become, my sister lives very close to me, and Daria, her name is, the book's dedicated to her. She's become part of our family. But the strange thing is, and Daria really, if she's listening, won't mind me saying this, she's actually really like Natalka. She's kind of blonde and beautiful and really good at maths. She studied maths at university and loves yoga, and I mean, also is quite straight talking. So, but I really did want to say that in the book. I wanted to make a couple of points in the book. One was that, we could have seen this coming, because there'd been an invasion in 2014 as well, but also did want to just quickly make the point that it's wonderful how we've welcomed Ukrainian refugees, but we don't always welcome refugees quite that way. So I want to make that
exactly. And I think this is the thing, if I can say, many of us, over the years have said the importance of crime fiction and how it works as that chronicle. I think I think crime fiction is the Dickens of now, because it chronicles our time. And in a book like The Last Word, I think to study that as a sociological text or a cultural text, the crime and the solving is one thing, but this is a text that allows us to really think about our society and what is going on and how we react and how we deal with things. And again, I think you're not, I don't think, and I hope people haven't found it like that, but I don't think you're lecturing us, but you just make it so real.
Oh, I hope not. But thank you, Jackie. What a lovely thing to say. It's an amazing thought that people could study my books too. But crime fiction generally, I do agree with you. And I think it was Ian Rankin said, didn't he? If you want to understand a country, read their crime fiction. And I do think that's true, because murder or a serious crime is a break in the status quo, and when that happens, that then you get to see how society works. Like one of my favorite books is The Moonstone, and of course you get that moment where something's happened, not a murder in this case, but so it means that a working class or lower middle class detective could come into an aristocrat's house and question them. That sort of upending of the status quo is really interesting. But yeah, I suppose also when I wrote The Locked Room, which is set during COVID, and I did think, I mean, partly I did also think, wow, this is a great opportunity to write a crime novel. But I did also think it would be a shame if nobody mentioned the pandemic and lockdown in fiction, because I know that contemporary writers didn't really write very much about the Spanish flu, did they?
Yes, that's right.
And fiction, anyhow. So I thought it would be a shame if there were no mentions in contemporary fiction of COVID and lockdown. And it was crime writers, I think, who did that more than other writers. Catherine Ryan Howard did it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Phil Rickman. And there are a few crime novels written then. So I'm quite pleased about that.
And again, I think it's, how it's dealt with. I think, again, the aspect of COVID in this book is that looking back and looking how people like Natalka and other carers looked after people.
Yes.
And risked their own lives to try and ensure that other people, were cared for. I wanted to ask you about, so you mentioned Daria, but the drawing on, the research that you did about Ukrainian culture, because there's so many beautiful elements to it. How did you do your research?
Well, I have to say, Daria and her mother, Victoria, who came to stay with us for a little while and has now gone back because she has her own aging mother to look after, that they were great help in that. And, that they've cooked us those wonderful food. We've had Ukrainian Easter and Ukrainian Christmas with them. So we have learned all these amazing time-consuming food. But even a few weeks ago at Easter, we did do the thing with the eggs again. We all got together and we dyed and painted the eggs, and we had the traditional Easter bread. So really, our lives have been very, very much enriched by knowing Daria, Dasha as we call her, and her mum. But her brother's on the front line. Her brother is on the front line, and so that's something that you can't ever forget. So it's been a wonderful experience for us to know her, but it's a very terrifying and tragic story as well.
Yeah, and you bring that in again, that a brother on the front line, only being able to communicate by.
It's quite strange because obviously I gave Natalka this one brother before I knew Dasha, and that's exactly her circumstances.
But isn't it weird? I mean, this is weird, isn't it? Stories being told that are there, that are people's stories, and you've captured that. We mentioned when we started talking about how you draw people in, and for me, I think another way I was thinking of, despite the murder and the mayhem that you spill across the page, there is so much joy and there's so much love in these pages. There's various different incidents, and we're not giving anything away if anybody's not read about any of the people who are dispatched, and we're not giving anything away about, because there's some absolutely joyful, wonderful moments. Are you very aware of creating that balance between dark and light?
Well, I really hope so. And really, you're saying such lovely things about the book. Thank you. I really hope so, because I love that in a book, and I don't want to. As anyone who's read my books knows, I'm not going to go in for sort of gruesome descriptions of sort of gore and violence, because that's not something I like doing, not something I like reading, so I'm not going to write it. Not to say some people do that very well, but I don't want to shy away from the fact that murders happen, like Poirot always says, I do not approve of murder. Well, I don't either. So, I want to make sure, clear how very tragic it is when someone dies, and I want to give the victim their space as well in the book. But I do want people to laugh as well. So I love it when people say there are moments that make them laugh or that bring them joy, as you said. If you just forgive this tiny little bit of name dropping, but the lovely Mariam Keyes did a really, really lovely thing on Instagram about books that she liked, and she chose The Last Word, and she was so lovely about it. She said, sure, people die, but it's lovely. And I thought that was just so sweet and so lovely.
I think that sums it up beautifully. It really does. I know we're getting to the time where we'll be taking questions, and if you
Time
haven't,
is whiz-
it is. And just to say to people, if you haven't put your question in there, please do so, because Philip's going to come on with those questions. So do make sure you get them in. The element of misdirection, and it's mentioned in the book. Do you have a finite number of red herrings that you deliver to us? Do elements not set off as red herrings, but as the story develops, you think better a red herring than a way, than a way to the killer or killers? How do you go with these things?
Well, I'm glad you sort of mentioned that, because as I said, it was in the end, in some ways, quite a hard book to write, partly because there's a massive cast of characters, because they're not massive, it's not War and Peace, but you have all the people at the writing retreat, and then later on Edwin gets invited to a very sinister book group, and of course Benedict's very upset because he doesn't get invited, but Edwin does. And so you've got all those people, some of whom have to necessarily for the plot cross over, but there are quite a lot of different people, so quite a lot of potential red herrings. And I'm not I used to plot in the sense that I used to do a sort of chapter chapter breakdown, but I would just start at the beginning and go to the end. But it was all there. But from the Stranger Diaries, which is my first supposed standalone, but it turns out to be the first of 4 books about Harbinder. I didn't write anything down, so I kept it all sort of in my head, which meant it could all be a little bit looser, and I think it was better for my writing. But it makes it a little hard sometimes to do the plotting when it's all in your head. The writer Isabel Gray is again a really great crime writer. She used to work for Midsummer Murders, and I remember she said to me that the rule in Midsummer Murders is that there have to be 4 people still alive at the end who could have done it. And I always have that in my head, that they've got to, even at the end, be 4 people who could plausibly have done it. So I think that's kind of my sort of touchstone of, there's got to at least be 4 people who could have done it. But yes, I all the writing and the people's writing and their responses to books did allow me a good few red herrings, which I did enjoy, but also allowed me, I hope, to drop in clues in quite a subtle way. So it was quite fun to drop the clues into their writing.
And thank you for that. There's another, I think this is going to be the last question that I want to ask, if that's all right, and let's see where we go. Or was it, I think it might be, Edwin. I think it is, I can't remember. Finding quotations sexy. Or is it Benedict? Because Benedict seems to have somebody says it, and Benedict has a lively appetite for these things, so it might be him. Anyway, it could be him. Quotations, what do they mean to you? Because I'm thinking in the modern age, and AI, we must mention AI, and again, working with students, how there's the ways of learning now are very different. In the past we had to learn things, and we had to learn them by heart. So number one, within this, do you find quotation sexy? And then thinking about quotations in the modern age, how relevant are they when it's so easy for us to just look up anything now that we need?
It's a slight joke against myself, because I've not got a great memory for things necessarily, but I have to say, a terrific memory for quotations. I can remember the whole of the Lady of Shalott, for example, quite a lot of Macbeth. I know a lot of poetry by heart, and you know, my kids sometimes, you know, will ask me to do like the Lady Shalott, something on a walk or something like that, and yet again, Andy will quite often tell me to stop. You know, please stop, please stop. Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 4. No, Messenger. No, please don't do any more. So it's a slight joke against myself, the quoting, because I think there's actually, it's in the new book that I'm writing now, which I must mention before the end of this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That somebody says nothing more annoying than people who quote Shakespeare, but I quote Shakespeare all the time. So if I take money out of a cash point, I always say, thanks, Courteous Wall, quoting Midsummer Night's Dream. When I have to go and do something, I always say, I go and it is done. The bell invites me, quoting the Scottish play. So I'm afraid I am that person who has a Shakespeare quote for all sorts of things, you know. So I don't think it's that sexy. I think it's quite annoying, somebody constantly quoting, but it is, you know, I use it in my writing because, my goodness, Shakespeare says things in wonderful ways, you know. I've used it
without a doubt.
The Devils Are Here was a line that we use quite a lot in Stranger Diaries, so much so the Polish edition is called Hell is Empty. So, you know, Shakespeare just says things. But you know what? I only remembered this recently. My very first published book was actually not the Italian Quarter. It was a very small, you know, those little books that they used to be, and it was called The Little Book of Shakespeare and Food. So,
can we bring that back? I think we should bring that back.
Bring that back. Well, there's a writer called Orlando Murren who's written a really good book about chefs killing people, and he found the book and he put this on Twitter and he cooked some of the recipes from it. It's really funny. So obviously Shakespeare and food were obsessions of mine from a long way back. And you know, there's nobody better, really. He does have a quote for every single occasion. And this book as well, I was able to bring a bit of opera, which is another love of mine.
Which is and that music and what music means. And and maybe, well, no, I was going to say something, but that'll be a spoiler. So let's.
Yes, yes.
No, thank you. No. So Elly, if you wouldn't mind, please, at the end, you must mention what you're working on now and things like that. But Philip, could you possibly come in if there are any questions, and would you mind doing the honours?
Hello there. Yes, we do have questions. We have quite a lot of questions. So I apologize if we can't get through them all. Hopefully some have been answered already, but I'm going to pick a few out here. We'll start with Alex Hawley. Elly, if you were to write one of your minor characters into a standalone, which would it be?
Oh, that's a great question from the great Alex Hawley himself, a really great reviewer and writer as well. So hi, Alex. I might have guessed you'd A, have a good question, B, a quite a hard question to answer. I think, well, I don't know if he counts as a minor character, but I've often thought that Cathbad the Druid from the Ruth books, that I would like to write a story just about him, maybe about his you know, a prequel that has his life, because his life has a lot of mystery in it. He seems to have done lots of things, and it's mysterious even to me. So that would be quite fun to write, I do think. So yeah, maybe Cathbad the Druid, or yes, maybe there's some other characters in the books. Maybe the Great Diablo from the Brighton books. Maybe he's got a story in him.
Okay, great. Here's a slightly cheeky follow-up question for Jacky. Jacky, do you have a favourite book of Elly's?
Oh.
She's putting you on the spot, I know, but there we go.
Sorry, I just need to unmute myself. I was trying not to make it. Well, you see, I didn't get a chance to talk about this, and I don't know if it's, you know, I don't know if it's wrong for me to say, but for me, it's A Girl Called Justice series. They are my favourites of Elly's books, because I just love to see that a protagonist that I can really identify with as a young girl at school, and how she wrote. Elly, would you just talk to us a little bit about that series?
Well, do you know what, Jacky, they're my favourites too. Well, I think that Justice is my favourite character if I had to choose one of my characters. So just quickly, The Girl Called Justice is a series that's kind of for middle grade, so from sort of 8+. But I honestly do say to you, I do think that anyone could enjoy them. 8 to 108, you know, they're really just shorter Ruth books. But they're set in the 1930s. It's about a girl called Justice who goes to school in the 1930s and immediately has a murder to solve. And very much, I think why they're so dear to me is based on my mum's life, because my mum went to boarding school in the 1930s and was desperate to solve a murder. She didn't like boarding school at all. She hated all the teachers. So she was desperate for some of them to die and she could solve the murder. Sadly, it never happened for my mum. But in A Girl Called Justice, it does happen. So I'm so glad you like those, Jacky.
Yeah, so they're my favourite.
There we go. Terrific. This brings us very nicely on to a question from Gail, who says that, Elly, she's very impressed that you can cross genres in the same way as Roald Dahl and Ian Fleming did between thrillers and children's fiction. What do you think the crossover is between the crime writer and the children's writer?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. Do you know, in a way, I didn't change my style at all. I've got, I'm not a writer who's, I said earlier, there's not that much gory, you know, violence or explicit sex in my books. So then we have to, and there's not loads of swearing, so I don't have to censor myself too much. And I didn't censor my writing style because I think it's great. I remember when I found a word that I didn't understand in a book. I loved looking up and finding out about it. And famously, the word soporific appears in the Beatrice Potter Tale of Peter Rabbit. You know, why not? Why not have the word soporific in it? So I didn't really even sort of work on making my style that much simpler. They're shorter, which I love. I love a short book. So, but it's an interesting question about crime and writing for children, because children are such great sleuths and they get everything. So you do have to be really careful. Also, because in a book that's quite slimmed down. So I would not say that in my books there's any padding, but you can't have in a children's books, you know, oh, look at that lovely, look at the lovely seaside in Norfolk. Oh, look at the marshes. Let's talk about that for a bit. It's all plot. And so you have to be so careful how you hide the clues and where you hide them. And quite often I do events in schools and maybe I read a little bit out and I'll say, what are the clues here? And they always get every one of them. So it's really, I think it's really good for a crime writer to write for children.
Okay, that's brilliant. I like that. The next question is from somebody called Caroline Jones, who says, I've been binging the Harbinder Kaur series. I can confirm that because she is my wife.
Oh, lovely.
And so conversation has been limited over the past 48 hours. Nice. I see the first two was billed as standalone. Did you at some point start plotting them as a series?
Well, that's a great question, and really no. So there was really no point in which I thought that these would be a series in the way that the Ruth books are. You know, I never really, although I didn't know how many Ruth books I'd get to write, I always knew there was a long story there that I'd get to write. So certainly The Stranger Diaries was meant to be a standalone kind of gothic fiction. And then Postscript Murders was a different sort of book, really, much cozier book, a smaller cast of characters, also slightly a bit of a road trip as well. So in a way, Harbinder is the character who's just appeared in several different sorts of books. And then you get Bleeding Heart Yard, which is more of a psychological thriller, really. So I never really plotted them as a series in the way that Ruth or the Brighton Mysteries is a series. So they're not in that way, but it's just so much that Harbinder, having had her kind of turn up in Stranger Diaries, she just seemed a character who had a lot more to say, you know, and I wanted to spend a bit more time with her, and also wanted to give her arc, you know, and her personal life to get some resolution as well. I won't say too much, but
okay, great. Possibly two follow-up questions to that. Will you be going back to Edwin, Natalka, and Benedict, and will you be going back to Ruth?
Oh, two good questions. Like the last Ruth book was The Last Remains, and I did say that that was the last, but I have always said for now. So I can totally see myself going back to Ruth. But actually in June, and I'm very glad this question has been asked because I totally forgot to mention this. In June, I've got some short stories coming out, and the stories is called The Man in Black. Man in Black. It's a short story collection, and in it there is a long short story about Ruth and Nelson, which carries on chronologically after The Last Remains. So you do find a bit about what they're doing. So I'm pretty sure I will go back to Ruth one day, but I just feel that she and Nelson need a bit of privacy. And yeah, I can see another Edwin and Natalka and Benedict book coming up, definitely. I'm quite bad at letting my characters go, so I'm pretty sure I'll go back to all of them.
Okay, terrific. On the subject of characters, we have a question here from Tracy Holland, who asks, out of all the books you've written, do you have a favourite character?
Oh, well, I do think, as I think I might have said earlier, that Justice is my favourite character, and that she is such a fun character to write. She's obviously the heroine of the school books, of the children's books, but also because she's based on my mum. And my mum was just such an amazing person. She was very positive and very funny, really didn't like any sort of authority. So she was a natural anarchist. Yes. And I remember she'd say things to me like, my school uniform was grey, and my mum would say, don't wear grey, try and be a bit different. Just on the grey spectrum. Why don't you wear blue and be different? And of course I was 11, please, like I just want to wear the same as, and my mum would say things like, yeah, it says get to school at 9, but why don't you get there at 10? Doesn't matter. They only mean 9-ish. They really didn't mean 9-ish. They really did mean 9. So, my mum was totally against any sort of authority. So, which actually was sometimes a bit trying growing up, but now I think it's super cool. So I think Justice is my favourite character because she just makes me laugh, and I just enjoy time with her. And in the short stories, there's a story that just for you, Jackie, about what she does when she's grown up.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And it does actually link with a question from Gwyneth Leanne Williams, who says, do real characters in your life seep into your stories? And have you told these real life people that this is you?
Well, I think the only example really of somebody being based on someone is Justice and my mum. And sadly, my mum did live to see me published, and she lived to see the Brighton Mysteries, which were based on her dad, my granddad. And of course, Elly Griffiths was her mum. So she got to see her name in print and everything, but she didn't live to read the Justice books, I'm afraid. I don't think I've knowingly based anyone on anything, but I do have a very good friend who is a druid, and she's never asked whether Cathbad is her.
Okay, great. We haven't got an awful lot of time, and I apologise if we can't get through every question.
Oh, wow, it's just whizzed past.
I know it has. Yeah, if only we had a little bit more time. But there is a question here I very much like from Donna Morfitt, which is...
Oh, Donna's great.
There we go. Has a reader ever noticed a theme or something about a character that you hadn't realised when you wrote it?
Oh, Donna, great question. Hi, Donna, and congrats with all the great things that are going on in your life at the moment. Yes. And in fact, I had a review. Oh, I can't remember. It was in one of the broadsheets or something, and it said, Elly Griffiths uses the sea as a metaphor for human unkindness. And I thought, yeah, I do. But I'd never thought that I used the sea in that way. But somebody said to me recently that there are lots of near drowning incidents in my books, which I don't necessarily think is true. But I'd have to go back and have a look. So certainly, yes, people have noticed things like that. Yes, I've certainly noticed themes that I haven't really always seen. So yes, and of course, lots of lapsed Catholics and things like that, but I kind of knew they were there as well already. but there's certainly, somebody asked me if I loved horses, because they appear in lots of books, and the answer is absolutely do love horses. I used to ride a lot when I was a child and had an imaginary horse when I was young. So obviously my imaginary horses are seeping into the books as well.
Right, okay. And sadly, we might have to make this the last one, but it's from Sylvie Doiselet. Elly, do you need a ritual in order to switch to Elly when you start writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I try not to, in a way, because I want it to be that I can write anywhere. I mean, I really like to write in my writing chair, which is where I'm talking to you, sort of at the bottom of the garden. But I would like to. So I've always tried not to do that. I've always tried not to like have a special pen or to have a, you know, a special glass for my water, or, you know, a particular coffee cup or anything like that. But of course I do a bit. So I really like to be in my shed. I like total silence, though I love music. I like to be really totally silent when I'm writing. I never eat. I never eat in my shed. Never have big food in here. So I have a coffee maker, so I have coffee. But so I suppose I like to have I've got a little cat called Pip. He usually comes and sits with me, so it's nice to. And when my previous cat Gus died, I did seriously worry if I could write without a cat. And I think I did do some writing without a cat, but it got a lot better again as soon as I got a cat. So.
Okay, we've got 30 seconds. 30 seconds, very quickly, from Gwen Cleon. Do you ever think of a murder and think, oh no, that's too much?
Oh yes, definitely. I don't really take from real life, and sometimes real life is just too horrible. So yes, definitely. Or sometimes I'll hear something and I think, wow, that's so interesting and gruesome and terrible. It's not for me. I'll ring Val and let her do it. So no, that does sometimes happen. And I should just quickly say that I've just finished a book this week, which I hope will be the start of a new series. It's going to be out next year. It's called The Frozen People. It's about a cold case mysteries so old that they have to go back in time to solve them. Phew.
Fabulous. Elly, we so look forward to that. I mean, just to start off on another journey with you and a different series, I think that will be excellent. Philip, thank you for looking after the questions and for all those people whose questions we managed to take. Sorry for the ones that we didn't. Elly, it has been so wonderful to spend this time with you. I'm sure for all of us, it's flown by, but we've learned a little bit more about you and your writing, and we've been in the shed, which has been great. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, for being a brilliant interview, and thank you, Philip, and everyone.
Yeah, to spend time like this, you know, Ghoul Crime Cymru Festival. Thank you so much. Before we go, though, time flies, as we've said, and please, can we remind you that next year, Ghoul Crime Cymru Festival will be back in person in Aberystwyth. Please get yourself there if you can. 25th to the 27th of April, 2025. And I know from everyone in Ghoul Crime Cymru, we hope we can welcome you there next year.
In my diary now.
Excellent.
Buy those dragon hats now. You are going to need them next April.
Get it. See you there. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.
Bye. Bye.